Welcome to the podcast Coins. I'm your host, Patrick McLean, and I'll be joined by a panel of experts. Here today with Roger Ver.
My name is Bruce Fenton.
I'm Sheila Warren.
So my name is Bill Barheit.
Nathaniel Popper. Dave Jevons. I'm sitting here today with Eric Voorhees. I get to sit here today with Charles Hodgkinson. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
So today I'm sitting here with Lynn Ulbricht, mother of Ross Ulbricht. And on this episode, we will discuss how Bitcoin will empower a global black market known as the Silk Road, which simultaneously props up Bitcoin while almost destroying it.
The same unfettered freedom Bitcoin provides its users to semi-anonymously carry out their financial transactions also provides an opportunity for criminals to finance a drug or human trafficking operation, or discreetly pay an assassin to knock off a rival crime boss. Without government regulation or meaningful oversight, Bitcoin quickly became the currency of choice for the legions of criminals lurking on the dark web. It eventually found itself being exploited as a virtual currency for an unprecedented online international black market called Silk Road. This was a marketplace where illicit criminal organizations and individuals could launder money, sell drugs and guns, and anything else their cold hearts desired. In this dark web marketplace, Bitcoin was the exclusive form of currency. In October of 2013, Silk Road was shut down by the FBI and its founder arrested. The non-reciprocal affiliation Silk Road had with Bitcoin left a stain on the reputation of the cryptocurrency. But should this stain completely destroy the foundations of a free and open market? And what is more pressing? Notice that we don't blame the mysterious Satoshi for the Silk Road or what other people do with Bitcoin. So should we leave a freedom fighter to spend the rest of his life in a cage because of other people's decisions? In this episode, we'll get a glimpse into the life and mind of that man, Ross Ulbricht. Ulbricht was eventually convicted of 7 crimes, including narcotics trafficking and money laundering, and was sentenced to a double life term plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. A harsher sentence than even that of the notorious Mexican drug lord, El Chapo.
Let's start with the Silk Road. Obviously, an important element, maybe a dark element. Regardless, I don't want to color views. I want to hear your unabashed, unbiased view on what the Silk Road was, what its legacy is, and what its influence was in the crypto space.
The Silk Road was an online marketplace, started about a year after Bitcoin was first released, that allowed people to effectively buy and sell anything they wanted, where you could use Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, and everything was managed in an anonymous way. And as a matter of fact, you couldn't even access the Silk Road by just going to a public website. You had to install special software called Tor, which would basically mask where you're coming from and where you're going to. Meaning, you didn't actually know where the Silk Road web server was. There was no kind of single web server as I understand it, but you needed to use this Tor software to access this kind of hidden site, and it would also hide where you're coming from. Okay? So the technology basically says, think of like an eBay, if you will, where you can buy and sell anything. You can pay in Bitcoin to remain kind of anonymous, and it doesn't matter what it is. We'll marry the buyer and the seller, and everything is fine. Now, it turns out that the most interesting products in that marketplace were things that you wouldn't be able to normally buy in a public-facing marketplace where everybody was out in the open, namely illicit drugs or weapons or other kind of vice-oriented things that weren't easily available or possible to get online anywhere else. Okay, and of course, as one might guess, the demand for these items was enormous. And so it turns out that the usage of the Silk Road exploded, which actually had an impact on the price of Bitcoin because lots of people now needed to get Bitcoin somehow in order to make their purchases on Silk Road.
I think getting through those first 2 years when it was literally worth nothing, that was the hardest lift in a way. Why would anybody keep doing this if if the Bitcoins they were mining on their computers were literally useless, were worth nothing? And once it became worth something, once it was worth 50 cents, people were gonna be drawn to it. I think in some ways it was inevitable that a drug marketplace would open. Actually, Satoshi Nakamoto was one of the first people to talk about a drug marketplace and say that this would be a natural first use of this. So this idea had been talked about for a while, and Ross was the person who first kind of made it happen. When you have some new technology, you have to have people who are willing to take a gamble and use it for some reason. And, most normal people, the world as it is works for them. So you have to find people, if you want to get your technology to work, you have to find people for whom the world isn't working for them, for whom they have some need that is not met. And, people trying to do illegal things are often the people for whom there's a need for something new, some new technology to do something that basically you're not allowed to do on the existing technology. So I think illegal activity and sort of, underworld stuff is often the first obvious use case for new technologies.
What was the internet used for early on? Well, it was not exactly, let's say, kosher activity, of the kind that we like as a society to necessarily encourage, although we sort of tolerate it in the shadows. And certainly it is the case that Bitcoin, and this is just a fact, Bitcoin was used early on, on the dark web for activities that were, again, not certainly illegal in many cases, and certainly not things that we really want to encourage. Criminal activity. And so I do think that there was an initial reaction, a rush to almost ban it, because of those uses of it that were known or understood to be predominant at that particular time.
In the early days of the commercial internet, all I would hear from a lot of business folks in the very early days after Netscape went public was, oh, the internet is porn and gambling. Because those were on the commercial side, that's who was making money in the early days, the porn sites and the gambling sites. They had figured out how to use the credit card gateways to process because they were motivated, right? So of course they were going to do it first. So I feel like there's this history repeating itself where, first of all, I don't hear much about Silk Road anymore. As a matter of fact, a lot of people who are now interested in it don't really even know the history, right? So when they hear it, they're like, oh, I didn't know about that. But a lot of people now, teenagers don't know the history. They know that there are porn sites on the internet. They probably know there's gambling on the internet, but they probably didn't know that the first 5 or 6 commercially successful websites on the internet were porn and gambling sites. I mean, things change, right? And so a lot of new technologies, the VCR, right, the video cassette recorder or the DVR, they were first wildly successful in the pornography industry. I don't think that's great. It just is, right? And so I think Bitcoin has evolved similarly to other technologies and is now to the point where it's got so much mainstream adoption for both consumers, retail investors, and institutions that has dwarfed any of the early illicit activity. And again, this is not a new thing, right? Many technologies have evolved this way over time.
Do you mind kind of talking about your understanding of the Silk Road story, and do you have any strong opinions there about everything that's evolved?
Yeah, I have very strong opinions about the Silk Road. The Silk Road was the reason I heard about Bitcoin for the very first time. I heard about it because people were able to buy and sell illegal drugs on the Silk Road. And I wasn't interested in the drugs at all myself, but I thought, what kind of money are they using for this? So I started looking into that. And I spent hours and hours. I probably spent 100 hours total reading the Silk Road forum and browsing the whole website. I never bought or sold a single thing on the website, but the Silk Road forums were so incredibly insightful and interesting there. And it just really felt like I had found people that saw the world very similarly to myself. And I assume it was Ross Ulbricht, I don't know, but somebody on that, on the forums there, they had a Book of the Month club, and they were reading all these various books and discussing the books. And they were literally reading books like by Murray Rothbard or Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. And these are books that I had read as a young man and had a huge impact on me. And so I saw people on this discussion forum reading these same sorts of books. And it was just wonderful, wonderful. I felt like I had found, all these people that saw the world so similarly to myself. And these weren't bad people on the forum. One example of people on there and what they were up to is there was a guy. And you probably would have had to have been on drugs to think that this was a good idea, but it was a pretty funny, interesting idea. He said, please don't laugh at me, guys, but I really want to buy a monkey. Can somebody sell me a monkey? And the guy that wanted to buy the monkey, I think, was in Germany. And then somebody in Spain said, okay, I'll sell you a monkey. And there was this whole discussion forum where they were posting back and forth, and they agreed on a price. And the guy said, okay, for like I think, 1,200 euros, I'll drive the monkey from Spain and deliver it to you in Germany. But for 1,000 euros, I can ship the monkey to you. But normally you can't ship monkeys. So his drug-induced idea of a good way to ship a monkey is that he was going to dress up the monkey in a dog costume and try and ship the monkey dressed up in a dog costume to the guy in Germany. And it was such a funny, interesting, but I think they were seriously discussing this. And so this was the type of person that was busy on the Silk Road Forum. They were busy discussing how to dress up monkeys in a dog costume and ship monkeys to people who really wanted to have a pet monkey.
Why do you think Ross created Silk Road?
I'm quite sure he created it as a way to have people have an experience of a free market. He was very passionate about free markets and actually initially created a video game where people playing the game would have an experience of a free market. And he talked to people about getting it published and got some attention with it, but then it didn't work out. And so he turned to a market on the internet to share that principle, to share that experience. And that's why he created it. He did not create it to be a drug kingpin and, make billions of dollars. He lived in a flat in San Francisco with 3 roommates. He didn't own a car. He was wearing the shoes I bought him when he got arrested. I mean, he's not someone who's motivated by making lots of money. He's someone who's motivated by principle and wanting to contribute to humanity in the world. And so he was all about free markets and having people understand the value of those.
Do you mind kind of going in a bit to his early years and what you think kind of formulated his ideas leading up to the Silk Road?
Well, he was just a normal kid, loved to be outside and play, and was very easy to raise. He was always a very easygoing person, and he still is. And honestly, he's very smart, but just a regular kid who played soccer and did Boy Scouts and, had friends and all of that. But actually his childhood and leading up to it, he's mostly interested in science in school, and then he went on to do that in college. He really didn't get interested in, say, free markets and that sort of thing until he went to graduate school and became involved in the Ron Paul campaign and started learning about free markets and the Austrian theory of economics, and became very passionate about it.
It seems he's very entrepreneurial. Does that run in the family, or?
It does. His father's a builder, designer in Austin. He was one of the first green builders in Austin. And I've had several businesses. And we're kind of an entrepreneurial family. And maybe that ties into the free market thing, because we're kind of people who would we'll do our thing and leave us alone and everything will be fine. And, we're very independent kind of people.
Definitely. And from what I understand, Ross studied physics?
He did. He loved physics in high school, and then so he went on to major in physics in undergrad at the University of Texas. And he thought he wanted to go into engineering, but he said, no, he wanted to study physics, nature, how things really occur in nature. And he ended up writing some I can't understand them at all, academic papers. And he worked in the solar cell lab there as an undergraduate, which is developing solar energy. So he was working on that in undergraduate school. And then he went on to graduate school at Penn State in materials science, which includes physics, but other sciences. And that's where he got turned on to Ron Paul and Austrian economics. And he was on track he had a scholarship to go to Cornell to get his PhD. And he goes, Mom, my passion isn't there anymore. And I'm like, what? What are you saying? What are you kidding me? Kind of thing. And but he just said, no, I'm going to, he's wanted to pursue these ideas instead.
If you stop and think about it from a moral perspective, you own your own body. Your life belongs to you. You have the right to put whatever you want in your own body. So if you want to smoke marijuana or smoke crack or drink bleach, your body and your life belongs to you. And anybody that wants to toss you in jail for choosing what you put in your own body, that guy's the criminal aggressor. So it's the FBI and the DEA and the prosecutors and the judges that were tossing the people from the Silk Road in jail. Those guys are the bad guys, not the people that just wanted to buy and sell things that make them feel happy in their lives. And so that sort of thing really needs to come to a stop. And I'm really excited about the ability of cryptocurrencies to empower individuals to, if they want to buy or sell a plant that makes them feel happy, more power to them, let them do that. And everybody else should just mind their own damn business. And I'm looking forward to defunding the prosecutors there that are wanting to put these peaceful people in jail for that.
It was the fact that people could make their choice to buy or sell anything they want, regardless of his ability to control what they were listing. He wanted to give people that freedom.
Well, it wasn't anything. And that's what I think is very different about what Silk Road was and other darknet markets. Not that I'm an expert, but it was based on the non-aggression principle of voluntary interaction and no force. So anything that harmed a third party was prohibited. And actually that was, I've been told by a high-level admin, they did enforce that as best they could. For instance, there was no child pornography permitted on Silk Road because that hurts the third party who is the child. There was no stolen property permitted because that hurts the third party who owned the property, etc. No fraud, that kind of thing. So the idea was it's okay for two people to exchange what they want as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. And so that was the basic principle.
Definitely.
It's important. It's an important distinction.
And it was just a really, really interesting, fun community to be a part of. And I spent quite a bit of time reading these posts and found it incredibly fascinating. And a lot of people don't know because, of course, the U.S. government twists it around. One of the main rules of the Silk Road was that you are not allowed to buy or sell anything that was stolen or anything that's sole purpose was to harm somebody else. So you could buy and sell all the drugs you wanted, but you sure as hell, you weren't allowed to hire hitmen. No child pornography was allowed on there. And the media just, as I've seen through my own prosecution from the United States government, they love to twist everything around and make it sound in the worst light they possibly can.
During that time, did you notice anything, like personally, did you see changes in him? Or could you have, when you look back, could you have seen now and said, in hindsight, like that you couldn't see anything?
No, ironically, I was worried that he was kind of drifting in San Francisco and not accomplishing enough, that he was kind of just hanging out and not, doing enough. And so he didn't seem stressed out or anything. He seemed, and actually 2 weeks before his arrest, we had a family reunion in San Francisco. So I was with him a lot. And he's just, went with us on outings, and there's pictures on the website of it. And no, I didn't.
So when did you first hear about this?
I first heard about it on October 2nd. He had been arrested the 1st of October. And what happened was I just walked into office where his dad was, and he was sitting like this, like hunched over. I'm like, what happened? What's going on? And he goes, Ross has been arrested. And I'm like, what? That's insane. He could, what? And I got put on the phone with a reporter from Reuters. And she was very nice. And I'm like, this is crazy. And she said, yeah, and they're saying he planned murder for hire. I'm like, what? Ross would never do that in a million years. And all of a sudden, everything exploded. And I turned on the TV, and George Stephanopoulos is saying, yeah, they got their man. And I'm like, what? Don't you get trials or something in this country? Weren't you supposed to get, innocent until proven guilty? And then cameras going by our house, and the neighbors freaking out, and my phone ringing off the hook, and emails pouring in. And I was like, what just happened? It was like a tidal wave and we've been, kind of trying to surf it for ever since, My whole life changed that day.
And can you talk a little bit about what you understand is the details of his arrest? I believe they got him in a library.
Yeah, I've actually not talked to Ross about it. I haven't, we haven't been able to sit down in freedom and privacy and talk about a lot of things. But from what I understand, he was in a library. And I understand it from trial actually, downloading the Colbert Report on an open source network, so that anyone could get in there, and that he was brought back in to help with some stuff on the site, and he was asked to sign in by an agent, and he did. And the thing is, when you think about it, this is supposed to be, it was became a multi-million dollar site. People say billion on media, that's inaccurate, it's totally wrong. It was actually, according to the government, 183 million, which is a lot of money, but it's not 1,000 million. And how could a young guy without programming training run this by himself on a laptop in a library or his house? There's a lot more to the story.
In my own prosecution, more than about 2 decades ago now, they do what's called a pre-sentence report, where the government goes and interviews all of your friends and family and this and that, and they just plain lied about me in my own pre-sentence report. They claimed that I had told the government person that the real reason I dropped out of college was to start my business and focus on my business. They claimed that I told the government that I dropped out of college because I didn't think I was smart enough to finish. Absolute lie, I never said that. And then they were interviewing my own father. My own father said that if I had been alive during the American Revolution, I would have been an instrumental figure in the American Revolution, right? That's a compliment. They twisted that around to say that my own father said, I'm a revolutionary who has a fascination with firearms. And so they just take anything and everything they can and twist it around, or just plain outright lie about you. And they did the exact same thing about the Silk Road itself and the people that were running it. And it's a real travesty. And
Was Ross the only person that created and operated the Silk Road, or did he have other people that helped him?
I think there were many Dread Pirate Roberts DPRs. There's a lot of evidence pointing to that. But I think he came up with the idea, he created it, and he admitted he created it.
Do you mind explaining the significance behind DPR, or Dread Pirate Roberts, as a pseudonym?
Right, so it was like so many on the internet, this was a pseudonym that was used by the administrator, and it didn't start being used for a while. But initially it was admin, and it was based on the movie The Princess Bride, and Dread Pirate Roberts was the character who would pass on his title to the next person. And that was the whole idea. And Ross passed it on, and then the next person could pass it on. And it was discussed in an article in Wired, actually, an interview with the guy who I believe was the actual DPR. The other thing is the multiple DPRs. I mean, different people would use that handle and do different things with that handle. He had help with he's not a computer programmer. Jared Yeryagan, who was a Homeland Security agent who worked undercover for a couple of years on Silk Road, I heard him with my own ears say that he believed there were multiple DPRs or administrators running it. He actually had a theory about a different person who he was pursuing. There's a lot of evidence, and there was evidence at trial that was stopped. The prosecution would not let the jury hear that, I think it was Inigo was his name, and he and DPR were trying to work out a handshake so that, because everybody knew there was more than one, so he would know it was him. And the next time Inigo came on, this DPR didn't know the handshake. It was like he didn't pass the test. And that was not, even that little shred of indication that there was more than one was not permitted to be known to the jury. Because the narrative in the trial was one guy, and we won our trophy, it's him, we've solved the case, it's done. And that's really not how these markets work, and how things on the internet even work. The way they handled the laptop seizure, was totally, there was so much protocol broken. One of the agents had the laptop without supervision for a couple of hours. The trial ended up with a copy of a copy of a copy. They crashed the computer. So
You're talking about his computer, his laptop?
His laptop they seized. So that agent was one of the witnesses, and our lawyer was asking him questions, delving into this laptop possession, and the judge shut him down. And I was like, what? And then she said, get your own technical expert, which is actually a violation because the defendant is not obligated to prove himself. It's up to the government to prove without a reasonable doubt that they're guilty. So that got into a thing. Our lawyer objected. Andreas Antonopoulos was going to come as a witness to refute the government's testimony. And actually, Roger Ver commented, he said, either the government's lying or they don't have a clue how Bitcoin works. After hearing the testimony, Andreas was coming, and he was told, don't get on that plane, you can't testify. They precluded our witnesses. We had a technical witness who was ready to come. He couldn't testify. And things like that, where I just thought, God, this is crazy. We can't give our side and challenge the government.
Well, to a hammer, all problems look like a nail, and government officials tend to want to regulate and control things, which doesn't really work with technology because technology is so quickly moving. We're still working on laws that were written 85 years ago before computers existed, and they're writing laws now, like the bit license was only written a handful of years ago. It's already out of date because the industry is so quickly changing. So that's one of the problems with the nature of the regulation. They're trying to continually play catch up and regulate these things because they sometimes fear change or any other reason.
There were many things like that. But I would say the biggest thing, and I didn't know it during the trial, was that there were 2 corrupt agents who went to prison, who gained access to Silk Road and was stealing a lot of money from vendors. They had free reign. They had unfettered access to the site. And they could act as DPR. They could change chats. They had pins. They had keys. They could do pretty much anything they wanted. And we wanted this to be known to the jury because 2 corrupt agents all over the site taints the evidence that they were looking at. And it wasn't allowed to be known to the jury. It was precluded, which is a violation of the Brady Rule, which says all evidence, especially exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that helps the defendant, must be made known, and it was not. And then I was like, wow. But I didn't know that until after the trial. But still, during the trial, different of our witnesses were shut down. And then the Homeland Security agent, Jared Yergin, brought up meetings and other things about an alternate perpetrator that the judge thought was valid, and that the prosecution was arguing very vehemently. And when we shut down court and came back after the weekend, and she shut it all down. She changed her mind and shut it all down. And so these corrupt agents and alternate perpetrator were not allowed to be known to the jury. And yet this agent, who's the government's own witness, was sure it was him and not Ross.
Can you talk a little bit about the general public and where you think they're misinformed, and what do you think the general public should know about this case, and how could it affect them in the future, like some of the things that happened to Ross?
Yeah, well, honestly, if it can happen to Ross, it can happen to any of us. And the fact that there's a sentence like this out there puts us all in peril. Ross is not unique. There's thousands of people in prison right now who have excessive, extreme sentencing and life sentences, even for marijuana. It's terrible, which was the main thing sold on Silk Road. Actually, it was small amounts of marijuana. I think the mainstream media has distorted so much of this story that what people think of as, oh, he planned murder for hire. Well, to be clear, with murder for hire, first of all, it was based on anonymous chats. It was never brought to a jury to rule on, so it was never ruled on by a jury. He was never convicted of it. It was never proven at all. The material about it, which, for instance, there's a chat between DPR and one of the corrupt agents, Karl Mark Force. Well, Karl Mark Force has been in prison. Karl Mark Force is a corrupt person who steals, and I assume lies, and he is the one who provided the material for the basis of the indictment, which included murder for hire. It's kind of like, really? No one has proven that Ross was this DPR that was saying about the murder for hire. And even the alleged victim, because there was no actual victim, this was a setup, even the alleged victim, Curtis Green, has come out publicly and said, I don't think it was Ross. He was a high-level admin. He goes, I don't think it was Ross. I want Ross out. I look forward to the day I can have him over for dinner. He has his own ideas about who he thinks it was, but he doesn't think it was Ross. and for his own reasons, and he's come out publicly about it. How many cases of murder for hire, which by the way usually doesn't get any more than 10 years without a victim, how many cases does the supposed victim come out and say, no, I want to have him over for dinner? The whole thing has been dismissed by the court with prejudice. There's nothing in the legal system about it now. It's even where in Maryland where it was indicted, it wasn't prosecuted, but it was indicted, it's gone. They've dismissed it. It still lives on in some people's minds because the media, well, the prosecutors fed it to the media.
Ross got, I think, double life sentence plus 40 years.
Without parole.
Right, which is higher than criminals like El Chapo, for example.
Twice as much as El Chapo.
So it's clear you don't think that sentence is fair, but can you talk a little bit about that, like the sentencing?
Yeah. I think it's beyond unfair. It's probably one of the most unfair sentences I've ever heard of in history. Certainly one of them, if not the most unfair in modern history. We're talking about a first-time offender, young first-time offender. Every conviction was nonviolent. Ross was never accused of physically harming anyone, inflicting any injury or murder or anything on anyone. Not one of his convictions was that. It was all nonviolent. You don't give somebody a death in prison sentence for nonviolence, especially a first-time offender like Ross, and especially someone so young. He was 26 when he created Silk Road. And, you know, this sentence leaves no room for redemption. It leaves no room for anything except basically being buried alive. And I just, it's appalling. Actually, people have come out, and Congressman Thomas Massey, for example, came out publicly. He said, this is the worst case of an Eighth Amendment violation I've ever seen. Because the Eighth Amendment says it's prohibited to use cruel and unusual punishment. Well, it's certainly cruel, and it's very unusual. And you're right that they call Ross a kingpin, which is ridiculous. Not too many kingpins are advocates of the non-aggression principle, and enforce that in their business. But El Chapo, as you say, he got half the sentence. Pablo Escobar, it's saying he's like Pablo Escobar or something. And it's really a misuse of the charge, and it's just absurd. They're saying any website host can be called a kingpin, essentially.
But if you read the sentencing judge's own words, it was very clear. She wasn't so mad about the buying and selling of the drugs and the website. Like, she was certainly annoyed with that and thought it was illegal and shouldn't have been done. But she was really mad about the underlying philosophy of that people own themselves and own their own lives, and they shouldn't need permission from some politician to be able to put a plant or a powder in their own body that makes them feel happy. Each individual's lives belong to them, but these violent people in government that want to control everybody else around the world through violence get really, really angry when somebody says, you don't own me, I own myself. And that's what made the judge so mad at Ross Ulbricht, is he had the audacity to think that he owned himself and owned his own life. And that's the one thing that these politicians really can't stand, when people say to the politicians, you don't own me, I own myself. And I want to use cryptocurrencies as a tool to empower everybody on the planet to be able to own themselves and tell politicians that they don't own you.
Well, to make it tangible for people, what are some of the constitutional violations that you think applied to this case, and that might, why should people care about that in the future?
Yeah, they definitely should care about it. Well, the First Amendment was, in my opinion, violated in the sentencing, where the judge flat out said, we know, I'm paraphrasing, but it's in the record. We know you started the case the site for philosophical reasons, not to sell drugs, but for philosophical reasons, which is true. We know you started the site for philosophical reasons, but then she said, I just don't know if it's a philosophy you left behind. So what she's saying is, and she said it's dangerous. I'm thinking, okay, so this philosophy that's so dangerous of non-aggression, voluntary interaction, do no harm to a third party, is so dangerous that he needs to literally die in prison. And that's what she's saying. Your philosophy is so dangerous. So basically, we have to put you away for life because of your philosophy. That's First Amendment. Your philosophy is first protected by the First Amendment. In this country, we're not supposed to be put in prison for our philosophy.
But if somebody that's not part of the government makes a website that allows people to do it on their own, life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was literally sentenced to die in prison. As somebody who's done 10 months in federal prison myself, in a much, much easier, better prison than where Ross is, that's one hell of a thing to do to anybody. And he's in a really, really tough place. And I hope he gets let out as soon as possible.
Maybe tell me a little bit about the violations that you think happened in the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, well, there's a whole list of them, but essentially the government or the investigators used investigative tools to spy on Ross without a warrant and without probable cause. And we have this all in detail on our website. But this was all based on an antiquated ruling by the Supreme Court 4 decades ago, based on the dial telephone that has allowed the government to essentially ignore our Fourth Amendment protections of privacy and just delve into all of our internet activity and using means without a warrant or probable cause from a court. And what it was saying that the third-party doctrine was saying, ruled that the number that you dial on a dial telephone could be known without a warrant. And even then, judges objected. Now, of course, our phones aren't really phones. They're computers, and they have all kinds of sensitive information in them. They have, personal information, all kinds of personal information, religious preferences, political persuasions, medical information, sexual orientation, all kinds of stuff are on our phones. And under this antiquated doctrine, the government can still go in and scarf up what they want, use it how they like, without a warrant, in secret. And this came up in the Supreme Court in Ross's case, and the court some of the justices wanted to address this overall issue, but in this case, they just punted it. And then there was a Sixth Amendment, because the judge justified her outrageous draconian sentence. And even the appellate judges were like, well, we probably wouldn't have given that sentence, but, okay, it's within her jurisdiction. By bringing up murder for hire, which was never convicted, again, never proven. And the Sixth Amendment specifically was created to protect the accused against a rogue judge or prosecutor from ruling on something instead of the jury, the 12 of your peers. And then there's the Eighth Amendment, which I just mentioned, cruel and unusual punishment, which is also clearly being violated in this case.
I think the government probably hates everything to do with cryptocurrency. Bitcoin generally is, I think people have the right to own and control their own property. And if you own and control your own property, then you deserve to have privacy if you wish in that property. For the same reason that someone has curtains on their windows or locks on their door, doesn't matter, what they're doing inside is their own business, and they have the right to not be exposed to the world. I think people have a right to privacy in their thoughts, in their words, and in their relationships.
Why was this sentence so much stronger than has been applied to other people?
Yeah, and actually every other defendant in the Silk Road case, any who've been arrested, no one got more than 10 years. And I'm talking about the biggest drug seller on Silk Road that actually sold drugs. Ross did not. At first I thought, okay, it's drugs, until I saw these sentences. He got, that biggest drug seller got 10. He got out early because of COVID. Another very big drug seller got 5, another 3. The agents got 6 and 7, the corrupt agents I've mentioned. The guy running Silk Road 2, which the government itself said was bigger and sold more drugs in a month, got no time at all. He never went to prison. He just kind of disappeared but it's on. We finally figured it out because we looked at the Bureau of Prison, tracks everybody. He was in jail for 13 days, but he had an equivalent thing. He did an equivalent position as what they've accused Ross of, and he had no time. And this is in direct violation of the Sentencing Reform Act, which says that similar crimes get similar sentences. You don't give one person basically 0 and the other one death, essentially. Now, one of the things they said was, oh, well, you were the first. You were the first to do this, so you have to take the whole brunt of everything. That doesn't make sense to me because the people after him knew what they were doing. He basically was kind of, let me do a free market website, blah, 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 and it's something that can get out of control, but it had never been done. So, and it's also, there's no legal foundation for saying, oh, you were the first, so you get life and this other person doesn't. But I honestly think it was an idea, because Ross had the idea, and I think ideas are often considered more dangerous than drugs, for example. And that Bitcoin, which was a big part of this, was considered dangerous and dark and mysterious by a lot of people. And it was an alternate currency. It was a whole other society in a way. And I think that was a big part of it. And this was confirmed to me a couple of years ago when The Intercept broke the story on Snowden material that said that the NSA was urgently tracking Bitcoin users before Silk Road's takedown. It was very serious. They wanted to stop this thing. And I think that is why they were so heavy-handed with Ross.
If you have a magic money printing machine where you can print as many dollars at any time you want and the entire world just blindly accepts using those dollars, and now there's this new technology coming out where maybe people won't have to use dollars as money anymore, and it's going to make your magic money printing machine not useful anymore because people won't want your dollars, you would do everything you possibly could to disrupt that magic tool of Bitcoin from disrupting your magic dollar printing machine.
What has it been like for him in prison?
Well, different prisons are different, but they're all prison, and they're all you're confined. You have to take orders. You're always told what to do. He has managed very well, and he was put into a maximum security prison that was violent and gang heavy because of his sentence, not because of his record or anything, and. It was tough. He said that, he was on the alert all the time. You had to be aware and learn the ropes and not step out of it's very dangerous. You have to know what's dangerous. He was on lockdown because of COVID since last March of 2020. He basically was kept in an 8x10 metal box most of the time, 24 hours a day for a year. So out of that, and even then, Ross was upbeat. Even then, when I talked to him, he was, I'm okay, don't worry, I'm all right. And he meditated a lot. And that, I think, was hugely helpful to him in that situation. But in normal situations, he's got some friends, he makes friends. Ross is very genial and likable and really likes people and respects them. So they resonate with that. I mean, even violent people. I mean, he was friends with a big gang leader in one prison, and I was like, oh my God, I've always tried to have him have a good peer group growing up and all that. Well, here he is, and he said, Mom, gang leaders are people too. These are human beings, and that's how Ross is. He's very much takes people as individuals. He respects people.
And Ross Ulbricht has already been in jail for since 2013, so coming up on 8 years now. That guy needs to be let out. He's one of the most clever entrepreneurs in the history of humankind. The Silk Road was one of the most successful startup businesses ever, right? It went from nothing to billions of dollars in sales, or whatever the total amount was, in a very short amount of time, and basically was the catalyst that drove Bitcoin adoption and cryptocurrency adoption to the entire world. So free Ross Ulbricht. You can visit freeross.org to learn more. I've donated more than, I think, well over $500,000, maybe coming up close to $1 million of my own money there to try and help that cause as well, because he's somebody that should be celebrated, not condemned to die.
Is there a message you want to get to Biden if he's watching this?
Yes, I would. President Biden, please look into my son's case. You're a father. You can understand that your children make mistakes, that they do things that you wouldn't advise, that might, turn out to hurt them. But they need a second chance. We need a second chance for Ross. And I just plead with you to give my son that second chance. He will not let you down. He will not reoffend. And he will contribute to our nation and our society.
I think when you look back at Bitcoin's history, when I really dug into Bitcoin's history, is that it was the Silk Road that basically tested Bitcoin for the first time and proved that it worked. It proved that you could actually send value from one side of the world to the other for somebody who needed it. And the people who needed it were people who needed drugs. And they were the first people who were willing to test this thing and actually send value through the system for transactions.
Because there was this big debate with Silk Road in particular of, is Silk Road the driver of demand for Bitcoin? And if that disappears, will Bitcoin disappear? And it turned out it was less than 5% of the volume was Silk Road. So the other 95% of stuff in Bitcoin was not drugs and prostitution and criminal stuff. And say it was legitimate stuff, go figure. Or at least other criminal stuff that wasn't on the Silk Road, right? So that was great.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. When we think of early Bitcoin, we think of drug deals and drug dealers, the Silk Road. We think of scammers. We think of stealing of coins and hijacking of websites and identities. We think of wild fluctuations in price and this incredibly nascent asset. Can that all really be considered a success?
I think all the negative things that are part of those early days and even still part of Bitcoin, they're part of Bitcoin. They make it stronger overall. So for example, being used for bad use cases. The bad use cases may be bad, but the money, the fact that no one can stop it shows an important principle of this money, that it is unstoppable. And that's a key value proposition. Same with the price swings and some of the other negative things around it. They sort of serve to strengthen the overall network, help it survive. Everything that almost killed Bitcoin helped it survive. And every criticism that it has and all of these negatives tend to make people learn. A lot of times people have painful lessons themselves. People who get into Bitcoin and try and control it, for example, or think they're going to use the rules of the old world to manipulate it. Those efforts fail. And Bitcoin ends up stronger and stronger from all of these adversities that it faces.
It seems like there's this inflection point around 2010 with Silk Road, where Silk Road becomes this illicit darknet, and Bitcoin is kind of bound to that. And it seems like for many years, when people are trying to grow the industry, they keep running into these roadblocks because it's Silk Road and Bitcoin. But I just want to get your thoughts kind of that timeline. Did we grow from it?
We grew from it completely because it made the headlines.
Yeah. So
there's no such thing as bad PR. There's PR. Okay, obviously you have to fight back against things in that nature, but you know what? Nobody cared. But when you start to think about, dark markets, what is that? Wow, drug marketplaces, people are doing that online. Right now, outside of our studio here, if I stood outside there for 10 minutes, I would be so high. So things have gotten more legal than they were 6 years ago, right? So the world has changed dramatically. But back then, in say 2014, 2013, that time, it was secretive and amazing and explosive, but that gave cryptocurrencies, in particular Bitcoin, the visibility that you need to then grow out of it. I think it's okay to have something that started out where some part of it, the notoriety, was bad. Because otherwise it would just be a thing for geeks, and that's fine. But this sort of blew it up, and then you have to recover from it and then come back and go, okay, now we're legitimizing the space, and obviously look at it. It's become legitimate.
People always fear change. Incumbents fear it the most, and they fight the hardest. And so, is it true that the first user of a pager was a drug dealer? Yep. Do other people use pagers, like doctors? Yep, they're not bad guys or gals. Okay, what about the internet? Porn industry, early adopters, okay? Today we all use the internet. Right now we're using the internet. All around us is the internet. And Bitcoin in the early days was used by drug dealers. Why? Because they couldn't use the traditional banking system. Why does the cannabis industry use Bitcoin? Because they're locked out by regulation, okay, by rule, out of the traditional banking system. Why? Well, because if you're the incumbent and you control the laws through lobbying, which is a form of corruption, actually, but then you can create a moat by creating regulations against new innovation. And again, that's been true for hundreds, probably thousands of years. The number one thing that's used for those illicit activities is the US dollar. Full stop.
Now that we know there are uses for Bitcoin that are both good and evil, our next episode will explore the rise of Bitcoin exchanges. With this new convenience comes new danger. I'm Patrick McLean, and this is the Coins Podcast.